It was supposed to be a simple lunch, 5 elegant women competing for the heart of a millionaire widower. But beneath the chandeliers of the Blackwood mansion, something darker was brewing. A glass shattered, crystal shards skittering across marble. The women froze, except for one. Keisha Williams, the quiet cleaning lady, knelt to pick them up. From across the room, a whisper, sharp as a blade. This woman shouldn't even be in the same room as us. They didn't know a child was watching, or that a hidden camera was recording. And by the time the truth came out, the real loser wouldn't be the maid. It would be the richest people in the room. David Blackwood had built his fortune through ruthless deals and flawless timing. But all the money in the world couldn't heal the void his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, carried after losing her mother in a car accident. On the advice of his therapist, David tried something unconventional. Invite 5 accomplished women into his home for a month and let Emma decide who would become her new mother. A lawyer, a doctor, a business tycoon, an architect, and a socialite, all white, wealthy, and picture-perfect on paper. 2 weeks in, something unexpected happened. Emma, who had barely smiled since the accident, began laughing again. But not with the candidates. She was happiest with Kesha, the 28-year-old cleaning lady hired only 3 months earlier. Kesha was different. She didn't shower Emma with gifts or grand promises. Instead, she made butterfly-shaped cookies, played hopscotch in the garden, and listened like every word mattered. And that made her dangerous. From the moment the candidates noticed Emma's preference, they began their quiet war. Cruel glances, whispered remarks, and subtle attempts to push Kesha out. They told themselves it wasn't about race, but their words betrayed them. That girl needs to learn her social place, the lawyer muttered over dinner. Appropriate people for her class, another added. What they didn't know was that David had been listening. Microphones hidden throughout the mansion captured every insult, every scheme, every carefully coded remark. As Emma's nightmares began returning, David realized something. The women who wanted to be her mother might actually be the ones hurting her the most. Meanwhile, Kesha, with her quiet strength and a past full of battles, had already decided. If these women wanted a war, she knew exactly how to fight it and win. The next morning, Kesha arrived early, her cart rattling softly against the polished floors. She kept her head down as she passed the grand dining room, but she could feel their eyes on her. The women had already gathered, dressed in silk and diamonds for breakfast, as if the mansion were a runway. It started small, a forgotten coffee cup left half full on the floor near Emma's playroom, knowing Kesha would clean it. A vase was deliberately tilted on the edge of the table so it would topple if she brushed past. But the worst came when Emma herself began to change. One afternoon, Kesha found the little girl hiding in the library, her eyes red and puffy. They said Daddy would be ashamed if he knew who my favorite person was, Emma whispered. That night, a dinner was held for one of David's business partners. Kesha, as usual, crept in the background. But she noticed the way the women spoke, in sweet tones when David was present, in venom when he stepped away. The doctor accidentally spilled red wine on the hem of Kesha's uniform. The lawyer smirked and whispered to the socialite, who let out a muffled laugh. Kesha excused herself without a word. What they didn't realize was that Kesha had learned long ago when to fight and when to wait. In her own neighborhood, she had faced sharper tongues and colder stares. Here, patience would be her weapon. Days later, David announced a family outing to the countryside. On the surface, it was an innocent weekend retreat. Horseback rides, bonfires, and laughter. In reality, it was a test. Hidden cameras were placed in every room of the lodge, and audio devices were disguised as decorative pieces. By the second evening, the masks began to slip. Around the fire, with wine flowing freely, the architect leaned in and said, "If Emma grows up around people like her, she'll never fit in our world." The others didn't disagree. In fact, they began to compete for the cruelest remark, as though each word might secure their position by tearing Kesha down. In another corner of the lodge, Kesha was with Emma, building a makeshift tent from blankets. Laughter echoed from their little hideaway, a stark contrast to the poison being spilled in the main hall. David watched the recordings late into the night, each cruel statement slicing deeper. By the time dawn arrived, he wasn't just disappointed, he was furious. This was no longer about finding a wife, it was about protecting his daughter. What none of them knew was that David had already made a phone call. A meeting was scheduled. By the time the women returned to the mansion, everything would change. The women returned to the mansion, expecting another week of subtle competition. Instead, they found the Great Hall rearranged. chairs in a half circle, a massive screen at the front. David stood near the fireplace, Emma beside him, clutching his hand. Kesha was nowhere in sight. "Before we continue," David began, his voice even but cold, "I think it's time we clarify a few things." The screen flickered to life. At first, it was harmless. Footage of the weekend retreat, laughter by the fire, horseback rides. But then, the audio shifted. "She'll never fit in our world. Appropriate people for her class. If Emma grows up around people like her, she'll be embarrassed." One by one, the women's own voices filled the hall, dripping with disdain. There was no mistaking the tone. Polite smiles in public, knives in private. Faces drained of color. The lawyer's hands trembled in her lap. The socialite tried to speak, but David raised his hand. "This," he said, gesturing to the screen, "is what you thought I wouldn't hear. This is how you spoke about the woman who has done more for my daughter in 3 months than any of you have in your entire lives." The final clip played. Emma's small voice breaking. "They said Daddy would be ashamed if he knew who my favorite person was." The room fell silent. The sound of Emma sniffling on the recording was like a blade twisting in the air. At that moment, Kesha stepped in. Not in uniform, but in a simple, elegant dress, her hair neatly tied back. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. David turned to the women. "You came here to win a title. Instead, you've shown me exactly who you are, and I won't have that kind of poison near my daughter." He picked up his phone. "You can arrange to have your things collected. Your stay here is over, effective immediately." The woman left in silence, heels clicking against marble. And when the heavy front door shut behind them, David turned to Kesha. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "this home and this family are yours, if you'll have them." Kesha stood there, stunned. In her life, victories had always been small. A steady paycheck, a roof that didn't leak, a quiet evening without trouble. But this was something else. Emma ran to her, wrapping her tiny arms around Kesha's waist. "I knew Daddy would believe me," she whispered. For the first time in years, Kesha let herself believe that maybe the world still held moments of justice. Over the next few weeks, the mansion felt different. There was no more forced politeness, no hidden daggers in conversations. Mornings began with Emma's laughter in the kitchen, helping Kesha make pancakes shaped like animals. Afternoons were spent in the garden, planting flowers that Emma insisted on naming after fairy tale characters. David wasn't just grateful, he was present. He joined them for these small rituals, and slowly, something unspoken grew between him and Kesha, not out of pity or obligation, but out of shared respect, trust, and the simple truth that they both loved Emma more than anything. One evening, as the sun bled orange and gold over the Blackwood estate, David approached Kesha in the garden. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, "but I do know I don't want Emma, or me, to face it without you." Kesha didn't answer right away. She just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. She'd fought too many battles to believe in fairy tales. But maybe this was something better, a life built on honesty, not illusion. The footage from that weekend never left David's private files. He didn't post it online, didn't try to ruin the women's reputations. He didn't have to. The real victory was right there, a daughter's happiness, a home free of hate, and the quiet triumph of someone they had tried to push out, standing exactly where she belonged. And maybe that's the lesson. Racism often hides behind manners and expensive smiles. But when the truth comes out, who we really are isn't in the words we say when the world is watching. It's in the ones we whisper when we think no one hears. So, if someone had been recording your words this week, what story would they tell?